Today's lecture is the article Converging on Empathy, Perspectives on Baltimore City Specialized Prostitution Division Program. And in your textbook you read some stuff about the prostitution, and I've discussed here that female prostitutes still make less than male prostitutes because they typically have to pay a pimp. So the introduction to the article is that it's looking at women who engage in prostitution and their views and experience in diversion programs. So this would be along with the problem-solving courts or other alternatives to diversion instead of just being arrested and going to prison. So the site was Baltimore City, and the women in the study were not on parole or probation. Usually they were arrested for the first time or the second time for a prostitution arrest. They had a 90-day individualized program for this study, and it was housed by the Office of the State's Attorney for Baltimore City. So one of the limitations is that once you have a program through the Office of the State's Attorney, a lot of times people won't participate because it is the State's Attorney, and a lot of people think that the State Attorney is against or opposes them individually. So there were two outcomes to this program. They could be terminated from the program, in which case the case begins anew, and they could be rearrested or have to serve time for the first arrest if they don't complete or commence the program. And if they successfully complete the program, charges are dropped and can be expunged. Typically this is also in treatment courts where the record is expunged at the end or at commencement. Also for juvenile diversion programs, a lot of times the charges are dropped if they successfully complete the program. So the methods they use were interviews, focus groups, 100 hours of observation, which obviously this is a qualitative study. They did a ride-along with the executive director, and they hung out at the Never Alone facility, and they collected the data from August 2009 through May of 2010. So some of the findings they had was the program was viewed positively by the women. They felt that they had empathy and understanding from the people who previously they didn't feel like they had empathy and understanding, such as the judge. They also found that the women in the program had negative law enforcement interactions. So they felt that they were often judged and misunderstood by law enforcement. The jail time did not address the underlying reasons that gave rise to their engagement in prostitution to begin with, which typically is poverty, or they can't find a job, or they have to be a caretaker, and this is a job that they can do. Traditional criminal justice responses often limited women's options even further because a lot of times it's just punishment. You're arrested, you should be punished for prostitution, and then you should continue on your way. Other things were that they found that the women talked about being treated like human beings. So they reported vulnerability to attack and derision, like by law enforcement and other folks. Here's a quote by Maggie, who's a 32-year-old white woman. They think that women in prostitution are trailer park trash and that they're less of a person and less of a human being because they went out and did prostitution, but they've never walked a mile in that person's shoes. So how do they know what the person is like? So from this example, it again is reiterating the negative social interactions that the women had with the traditional criminal justice system, and that they felt that the program and the drop-in center was more humane and that they were treated like human beings. So things about gender. Maggie, who you saw on the last slide, said, and I just don't think a male judge, I just don't think men understand women like a woman would. So she would prefer to have a female judge because she thinks that a female judge would understand her better. This is called standpoint theory and standpoint method. So that is coming from Dorothy Smith. And standpoint theory and method has the idea of you're doing the method from the shoes of the people that you're qualitatively analyzing. So for Maggie, standing in the shoes of a white female prostitute, or in this case a female judge, is standing, right, understanding what she's going through better than what a male white judge could stand for. And other women in the study had similar experiences about they would prefer to have women in the criminal justice system because they felt like they would understand their standpoint. So investing in women was another theme that was from the findings. So leaving prostitution requires a combination of internal or personal factors and structural opportunities, and they opted for a program to stay out of prison. Now, the article doesn't go into depth about this, but a lot of times in my treatment court evaluations, a lot of people are opting out of prison and to the program because they don't want to be in jail or prison. And then about halfway through, a lot of times people change their mind and start changing their attitudes about the program. So provisions of services were often cut off from resources, especially when they were arrested, and this program allowed if your arrest was taken off your record, then you would be allowed to have housing and other factors. So what the court did and the program did is they had linkages to appropriate and available services. So they would offer better coping skills, they would offer concrete assistance in programs, and they would offer assistance in housing. Once you have some kind of arrest record, Section 8 housing typically will not allow you to stay in that housing because they for whatever reason, they will evict you from that apartment. And so that's part of why people continue the cycle of prostitution, because they are like, well, I've been arrested, now I've been evicted, so now I have to go find a more expensive place to live, and this is detrimental to cutting the cycle of prostitution. So the discussion of the article is that they felt that they better understood the court process by going through this program. They had more access to housing. They had more resources and access to employment. They weren't barred from participating in society by prior incarcerations, especially if they completed the program successfully. And they felt that they were respected and criminal justice personnel had positive social interactions with them. The limitations of this study focuses primarily on local individualized responses rather than broader systems change. So how would you take this Baltimore City program and make it national? They don't have the question for that because it was just one study of this one program. Compliant with the program guidelines and present themselves in the manner and form that's consistent with understandings of dependency and assistance, they have a desire to change. And we saw this also in other literature last semester in the problem-solving court class, where a lot of times, even for counseling, a lot of times the counselors would say, well, her front stage is not appropriate, she's not wearing the right clothes, she's not speaking the correct standard white English, she's not wearing the right jacket, and all these signify to the counselors in a research study last semester that the person wasn't taking it seriously. The women weren't taking their addiction seriously, they weren't taking the change that they should make seriously, and so then the counselors would have a negative connotation of the women in the front stage. And then the third limitation is overly characterizing those who engage in prostitution as victims. One denies their agency. So, for example, there are prostitutes and a movement about prostitution where women are specifically selecting prostitution because that's what they're sex positive, that's what they want to do, that's their job, and all this kind of stuff. So this program is automatically assuming negative punishment, that a woman can't make her own decision about whether she wants to work as a prostitute or not. It's creating the cycle of poverty that Moynihan talked about, where you have no agency and you're just fixed in this poverty generation after generation.